Reason for that that's a pretty simple explanation. A lot of people automatically tend toward the inside line on turns, and with the switchback turn, that's something you really want to stay away from. You need to remember that your bicycle is probably not going to turn sharply enough, especially if it's a long downhill bike. It's probably not going to turn sharply enough to make a really tight switchback turn. Cool thing about the way a downhill bike or any bicycle works for that matter is that if you roll a bicycle on the ground and turn the handlebars as tightly as you can, you'll notice that the front tire takes a really wide line around the turn, whereas the back tire is almost staying in a static position, kind of like a compass on a piece of paper. So knowing that, all I really need to do is guide my front wheel through the turn properly, and if my front wheel's made it through the turn, the back wheel's just going to follow, and it's going to roll over just about anything. So I'm going to pay particular attention to the line my front wheel takes, and to start going into a switchback turn, I'm generally going to try and ride kind of high into it, and then I'm going to try and commit or fall in to the turn to finish the turn out. Now, falling in is something we've touched on already, and it really becomes pretty obvious when you slow video down and you're watching switchback turns that falling in is one of the essential ingredients to a proper switchback turn when done at speed. When I talk about falling in, it's a leap of faith, just momentarily, where I'm making a turn and I know I want to turn back the other direction, so I'm going to turn my head, my shoulders, and then my hips, and then hopefully the bike's going to just be underneath me, and most of the time it's going to be. So we're going to come into the turn a little bit wide with the front wheel. Back tire is going to take its own line. It's going to find its own line on the inside, and we're just going to try and utilize that concept of falling in. In general, when we're coming toward a turn, we want to have really good brake modulation, meaning we don't want to create a skid. There are always going to be exceptions in mountain biking because terrain is so diverse. In some situations, it's okay to skid the back tire, at least on a closed racetrack. And those situations would typically be where I'm needing to set up the bicycle, needing to get it turned without creating too much pressure into the front wheel through the turn. So like in really dusty, dry, loamy conditions, sometimes I don't want to just hold a lot of pressure through the turn, really pressuring that outside foot, because I'm going to blow right through the turn. It's just going to plow me down into the dirt. So what I'm going to do instead in that situation is maybe grab a little bit of brake and create almost a false apex to the turn, a place where I don't necessarily have the most pressure into the turn like I do on a proper flatland turn where I have good traction, but instead just skidding the bike slightly, and then as I let off the brake and it catches traction, that is the apex. So there are times where we can actually create an apex to a turn that way. Counter-directional steering, it's something I'm premeditatively doing to create a better situation on my bicycle. With counter-steering, I'm just countering something that the bicycle is doing that I want to change. So on a flatland turn, a lot of times you may have felt, maybe especially on a 180-degree turn, if you're trying to make it through the turn, that your bike just kind of wants to find the edge of that turn and it doesn't want to turn. So one of the things we sometimes utilize when we're in that situation and trying to make the bike turn is we utilize a little bit of counter-directional steering. So basically, as I'm coming through a turn, if I'm turning left, instead of just thinking about pressuring down with my right hand, I might actually just give the slightest little bit of input to my left hand here, which drops me into the turn and allows me to go through and finish the turn. Now that's differentiated from counter steering. When I'm counter steering, I'm countering a slide. So if I'm on flat ground, coming through, making a nice turn, and my bicycle starts to slide, basically what's happening there is the front wheel is starting to slow down in relation to the ground. And eventually, if I don't do something to regain my front tire's speed, it's going to start to slow down, and tuck underneath me and cause me to just basically wash out in the turn. So I'm going to do something about that actively. I'm going to counter against that. So as I feel that front end starting to tuck, I'm actually just going to bring the bars around, and this is basically the beginning of a two-wheel drift. I'm going to bring the bars back a little bit and just allow that tire that's wanting to slow down and wanting to tuck, I'm going to allow it to just get back up to ground speed again. And as soon as it does, I can steer back into the turn some more. And that's really what a two-wheel drift it consists of, is me feeling that wheel starting to tuck and letting it drift, letting that speed back out a little bit, then pulling back into the turn, and then feeling that feeling again, and then just kind of working with that. And that's basically the essence of creating a good two-wheel drift.
I think oval track racing in the motorcycle world, you see those guys the whole time they're going around all the corners, you know, they're pretty much in a two-wheel drift, because obviously they have the motor, you know, and their back wheel is turning, but they have to keep their front wheel up to speed so they can make it out. And they're not even turning into the turn, they're turning out, but they're actually, you know, turning the opposite direction that their front wheel is.
Exactly. It's a really effective technique, and it crosses over into all kinds of two-wheel activities. I'm on a sport bike, a motorcycle that is, on pavement. I can lean the rider and the bicycle, right? Because I know that I have a nice round tire that's meant to stick to pavement. Hopefully the pavement doesn't have a big hole or rocks on it or something like that, and it's going to stick really nicely. In this situation though, I have a lot of undulations on the terrain, and I have a pretty narrow tire, and it's not really meant, it's got a lot of knobbies on it, it's not really meant for just me just leaning on a flat plane. So on a flatland turn on a bicycle, I'm actually going to lean the bicycle and not the rider.
Oh, really?
The rider can lean a little bit, but not very much. Remember when we were braking, we were talking about our directional forces, and that we wanted to basically press down the middle row of knobbies into the ground, right?
Okay.
So now that I'm going onto the edge row of knobbies, I want to press those into the ground. And if I was to lean my body over, what happens to my arrows? They go into the ground and kind of bounce up and diffract. They're not going straight into the ground. So here I would essentially still, if I was leaning my bicycle and my body, I would be trying to weight the middle row of knobbies, and they're not even on the ground. So what I want to do is I want to actually get up over my bicycle into a situation where I can weight that inside row of knobbies that's trying to bite. So in this situation here, again, I'm riding inside my body, my outside knee is bent. If I get too far to the end of my rope like this and my bike starts to slide, I'm going to have no recourse, right? So I want to stay down here where I have recourse to move the bicycle either direction, should it slip or should it hit a bump. And I want to be in a situation where I'm not only within my own human suspension, but I've compressed the bicycle. Notice how when I push down on my pedal and through the bottom bracket, using my hip and my foot to push down and through, I'm able to load both the front and rear suspension. And that's really important. A lot of times people have a tendency to come into turns and just kind of steer with their hands, and you have this feeling that your front end just wants to slide out on you. That's because you don't have enough pressure over the front wheel. In order to get that pressure over the front wheel, I need to not just think about turning with my hands, but think about turning with my foot and my hip. And that's where that pressure is going to come from, okay? So now, if I got this onto a berm turn, what would be the difference? Say we have a 45-degree angle. What can I now do with the rider? I can lean up to 45 degrees, that's right. And beyond that, I can lean the bicycle more if I want to go faster. When I come into a turn, if I just ride through a turn with my feet level, I'm essentially just following my bicycle through the turn and trying to turn with my hands. I'm behind my bicycle and I'm basically pushing it, and that's going to make the front tire really likely to wash out. There also is no definitive moment at which I've gone from going straight to making a turn. If I dip my outside foot though, and point my inside knee toward the inside apex of the turn, by pointing my inside knee, I start to rotate my head where I want to go, commit my shoulders where I want to go, but more importantly, I know that if I'm pointing my inside knee into the turn, even if my outside foot's not down at 6 o'clock, I've put all the pressure onto my outside foot. I cannot stand on this foot and simultaneously move my knee in. So it's a cue to get my weight onto my outside foot. It's also a cue by pointing at the inside apex of the turn to turn my head, turn my shoulders, and to start getting me turning toward that turn. Much better, good, you dipped that time, good. Good, now you're starting to dip, good, excellent. Yes, perfect, money. Unfortunately for us, it doesn't end with a flatland turn. It ends getting really off camber. And this is going to become especially apparent now at the end of this turn. It's going to be really necessary for me to be coming through this turn. I'm leaning the rider a little bit because I'm on flatland, but not that much. I'm relatively upright.